Namaskaram, welcome to the first episode of Insights from Epics. Today I will be talking about Shantanu, father of Bhishma. Now, why should we have something like Insights from Epics? After all, they are old stories about people thousands of years back. But that is precisely the point. They are old stories about people thousands of years back, and those people are, in their psychology and their behavior, in the lessons they can teach us, they are exactly like us. Human beings have a lot to learn from these so-called old stories. I find it very interesting that this year there's already been a movie on the Odyssey called The Return with Ralph Fiennes, and then Christopher Nolan is making a full-blown movie on the Odyssey. So the mythic or the larger epic resonances in world culture are coming back. In India, we are very fortunate. We have the two epics, Puranas. We have the greatest storytelling tradition in the world. So there's a lot to learn. This is our first episode, and we'll talk on Shantanu. Now, Shantanu is a very perplexing man because on the one hand he is very great, and on the other hand he is extremely foolish. Let me be very clear and say that none of us currently living have the stature of Shantanu. He had so much Shakti that he could give a boon to his son that he had Ichha Mrityu. We can't do that. He had so much Shakti that he could be married to one of the greatest goddesses in the Indian pantheon, and he survived the encounter. None of us can do that. So he was a very great man. He was also one of the greatest kings India has seen. His reign is justly regarded as one of the most prosperous and happiest for his subjects. Hastinapura probably was never as happy when they had Shantanu. On the other hand, his choices when it comes to personal relationships are so utterly bizarre, and you're like, dude, what were you thinking? So we want to get into that. We want to get into the how he might have been a very great king, but when it came to his personal relationships, he was an utter failure. It is really tragic to see, and it comes from a naive goodness on his part. This is something that people don't realize, that you can be too good, you can be too naively good, and then you get into trouble. So the first of these encounters, these disastrous personal relationship encounters, happens when he meets Ganga. He doesn't know that she is Ganga. He doesn't know that she is the river of heaven. He just sees this very beautiful woman on the bank of the river, and he instantly falls in love. Now, I don't fault him for that. Love at first sight is a real thing. I can testify. But you don't take bizarre decisions because you've fallen in love. You fall in love as much as you want, but don't do foolish things as a consequence. Of course, that's why it's called falling in love, not rising in love. Anyways, he instantly, he doesn't want to know. He questions her, who are you? Are you a goddess? Are you a water nymph? Are you some otherworldly being? But doesn't matter. Are you a human? Doesn't matter. Any of that. Marry me. And she says, okay, but I have some conditions. And he's like, anything. First red flag right there. You don't enter into a relationship saying anything goes. Yeah, that is a formula, a recipe for disaster. But this man, who should know better, because not only is he a Kshatriya, he is a king, he certainly cannot say such things, he plunges right in. So her conditions are that you will never question me on any of my actions, you will never oppose me on any of my actions, you will never prevent me from taking any action, and you will never reprimand me for any of my actions. And our man is so enraptured by her beauty that he says, yeah, of course, why should there be? And you're like, dude, what the hell are you thinking? That is a calamity, a calamitous way to enter into a relationship. These parameters are absolute no-nos. For even a normal, ordinary man, it is a terrible situation. But for a king, what do you mean? How can you? But he's so besotted, he just can't see straight, because he's not thinking with his big head, he's thinking with his little head. Sorry for the language, but that's the truth. And he just agrees to this absolutely insane condition. So he brings her home, marries her. The marriage is hugely successful. Everybody loves her. The country sees an unprecedented reign of prosperity and peace and joy, and everybody credits that to the new queen, saying that she has brought luck to the country, she has brought luck to the king, and all well and good. And the old saying is, something is too good to be true. So yeah, it was too good to be true. Then they have a child, even happier. I've got an heir to the kingdom. Hastinapura will have a prince. So the child is born. She gets up from the bed, walks to the river and throws the baby in. And our man has promised to never question her, to never oppose her. So now he doesn't know that she is Ganga, river of heaven, and that is why Mandakini is the river of heaven, Ganga is her form on earth. In Patala she is known as Alaknanda. Okay, that's a side note. He doesn't know that he is married to a goddess, and like I tell you, marrying a goddess is... Now I find something interesting here. Usually when the divine beings have children, the childbirth is instant, there is no pregnancy. But since she was in disguise, she kind of plays it out as if she's a normal human woman. And so they're together for almost 10 years is what the text says. At least 8 years, because she gives birth to 8 children. And for 7 years, he watches her murder her newborn child, and he doesn't say a thing. And because he's honor bound, the people, the Kurus, they never break their word, they are honor bound to their oath, and his oath was... Now he doesn't know the backstory behind this. The backstory behind this is that Ganga took form on the earth to help relieve a class of divine beings called the Vasus from a curse. There were 8 of them, and they, for heaven knows what reason, they got it into their mind that it would be a good idea to grab the cow, the sacred cow of Vashishta, who is a Brahma Rishi, and naturally he curses them. And the main guy, the main instigator of the event was one chappie called, let us take a look at that. What was his name? He was... One minute. He was one of the Vasus, but there was a reason. He was cursed that, yeah, he was Dyu or Prabhasa. He was a Dyu or Prabhasa. And he and his wife were regarded as the main culprits. And his other 7 brothers were cursed, and so Brahma Rishi curses you, that's not a good idea. His consequences are not good. After much pleading, he Vashishta, like usually the case in these stories, he tones it down. He says, all right, if you can find somebody to liberate you as soon as you are born, 7 of you will instantly be freed and can come back to heaven. This Prabhasa fellow, he will have to spend a long time on earth. He will have a lot of fame, he will be universally respected, but he will never have wife and children. So that part, Vashishta was not willing to let go of that part of the anger. So they went and plead with Ganga to save them, and she says, okay. Now what our friend Shantanu doesn't know is that he was not her first choice. Her first choice was his father. Now usually most men do not know this, but they are not the first choice of their wives. Yeah, they are what their wives finally agreed upon. Now, when somebody is to be incarnate on earth, especially a divine being, there is a problem of Rinanubandhana. There has to be some kind of karmic causal link to be incarnate. And that was obviously from the Hastinapura dynasty. So she went to Shantanu's father, Pradeepa, and she wanted him to be the father who would bear all those children, and then she could liberate them. The story goes that she went and sat on his right thigh when he was meditating. He did not have any children at the time, so he was meditating, he was doing tapasya for the sake of children. When he wakes up and he sees this on his thigh, and he's like, what's going on? Why are you interrupting my tapasya? She says that I would like to marry you, and he says, unfortunately you have sat on my right thigh, that's for daughters or daughters-in-law, so you have to marry my son. I cannot accept you. Now he also had terrible one-nightitis just like his son, so it was a very cultured way of and she was very disappointed, but she accepted it. But the important thing is she needed somebody in that bloodline, otherwise those Vasus could not be born. That is the complexity of human embodiment, that is the complexity of Rina. But please remember that, and Shantanu is the 3rd child, born in the old age of his parents. In fact, all the children of his parents are born when they are advanced in age. The first son becomes a leper, so he goes away into the forest and becomes a great sage over there. But because a leper cannot become king, so he takes sannyasa and goes. The second son, Pradeepa's wife's brother, had no children, so he is adopted by his maternal uncle and he becomes king over there. And Shantanu is the younger boy. And well, he was the baby of the family, and he was evidently coddled by his mom, so he had no idea of intersexual dynamics, and he agrees to a situation like this. He agrees to the proposition of Ganga that she is never to be questioned. Okay. When she goes to throw in the 8th baby, that is when his resolve breaks, and he stops her and he furiously insults her and calls her all sorts of names. And I can understand, he's seeing 8 heirs of his being thrown into the river. Obviously, he can't. And she gets very upset with him and reveals the whole story. Now, I don't know why she could not have revealed the story. Maybe that was part of Vashishta's curse. She could have told him the deal from the beginning, and then she says something to twist the knife into him, because when a relationship ends, the women cannot resist doing that. So she says, if you had not stopped me, I would have stayed with you till the end of your life, and you would have been very happy. But now that you have broken your word to me, I can no longer be with you. So while she was a very good wife to him and a very good queen, she never really cared for him. Otherwise, because here is the out, so she takes the legal out. Says, now I will train your son and bring him back to you when he's 14. She takes him, and then he's trained by all divine beings, by great sages. That is why he becomes so great. And he's called Devavrata, So at the age of 14, then she restores him. He is again walking by the river, and he sees that the Ganga is very low, and he goes and he sees that upstream there is a young boy who is damming up the river with his arrows. And he recognizes that this is some sort of supernatural person, and then Ganga appears and says, here is your son. As promised, I have made him the most accomplished prince in all of Bharatavarsha. He will be a great king for you. Please take him back. He pleads with her to come back because, he's suffering from one-itis as usual. And she says, no, you broke your word, I cannot be with you. The reality is that she never really cared for him. Not that she would have not kept her side of the bargain. You must understand one thing about these otherworldly beings. They are extremely faithful, and they are very extremely honorable. They keep their word. It is human beings who are promiscuous, unfaithful, and break their word all the time, and then they suffer the consequences at the hands of these otherworldly beings. But for them, their word is their word. So she had promised to be his wife, and as long as he lived, she would have been his wife. But I guess it's asking too much of human flesh to stand by and watch your children being murdered like that one by one. But in her case, it's a complex story. And the Mahabharata is full of such complex dharmic choices. What is the right thing here? For heavenly beings to be incarnate on earth is an absolute torture. So to liberate them immediately is a blessing. From a human perspective, it sounds horrible. From their perspective, it sounds wonderful. Just 9 months in a womb, that to the heavenly Ganga, and then as soon as born, within a few minutes, liberated. So that is that. That was the first story, and he gets the prince. He's very happy. Everybody is very happy because, Devavrata, universally acknowledged as the greatest Kshatriya of his time. Everything is going well. Few years pass. Shantanu is again out on his hunting, and now he comes across another beautiful lady by the river. At this point, one is forced to make the observation that his Mantri Sabha, his minister, should have made some kind of arrangement that the king doesn't go wandering near water bodies where he'll encounter strange females. Unlike King Arthur, in his case, it never ends well for him. So what happens is he finds this extraordinary scent of musk, and he follows the scent. And to his consternation, he finds that it is emanating from the body of a beautiful woman who's plying a ferry across the Yamuna. So first problem with Ganga, now second problem with the river Yamuna. As usual, as per his usual behavior, instant falling in love, and I want you to marry me. And she is somebody who is known as Satyavati. She is the daughter of a fisher chief and a fisherman's clan, and she says like, आप मेरे बापू से बात कीजिए, yeah, like, please talk to my father and do the needful, because I must give him credit. You must give this man credit. He's the king. He meets these lonely women and he wants to do the honorable and the right thing. He wants to marry them. He doesn't think, let me kidnap them and take them to my palace and do whatever I wish to. In both cases, he's very honorable and he's very dharmic about what he wants. You must give him credit for that. Like I said, he's a very great man. Vikram Sampat's new book on Tipu Sultan, he says how his father Hyder Ali used to just kidnap whichever women caught his fancy, and that is usually what royalty does, and he does not do that. So he goes to the father of Satyavati and he formally says, I want your daughter and I'll make her the queen, yada yada yada. And the father is like, oh, this is that simp Shantanu. This is the guy who agreed never to question his wife. Lottery lag gayi, I've hit the jackpot. Let me see what I can squeeze out of this guy. Because he is trading on his surety, his certainty that Shantanu is decent and will not be oppressive, that Shantanu is noble and will not act like a tyrant. Now here is the problem. If you are naively good, you are helpless in the face of malevolence. And Shantanu is naively good. In fact, Shantanu is like Hindus only, helpless in the face of malevolence. And so this guy is trying to squeeze out his maximum, because he knows this guy will not resort to violence. He will not do something adharmic just for his own, and I can squeeze benefit out of him. So he says that my daughter's children should be the inheritors of Hastinapura. They should rule after you go. And this one says, Shantanu says, impossible. My son Devavrata is the natural heir and I will never allow that. So he says, in that case, you don't marry my daughter. You can't marry my daughter. And so he goes back to the palace and he goes into big decline because, intense manitis. He's suffering. He's not eating. He's lost interest in administering the kingdom. He's just sitting and sighing heavily, and his son notices and asks the mantris asks his father what is going on, and his father just brushes it off, says that I am worried about getting old and I am concerned, and his son knows his dad is lying to him because his dad is an honorable man and cannot lie well. So he asks the ministers and finds the whole story. Now there is one interesting side note to this story. Satyavati is the father of the Rishi Vedavyasa, the mother of the Rishi Vedavyasa. What happened was, she was ferrying across the Yamuna another Rishi called Parashara, who is a very great Rishi, not as great as Vedavyasa, but pretty good. And Parashara realized that the astrological conjunction is such, and because of his Divya Drishti, he was a Rishi, he realized that she is not actually like a fisher woman, she is actually a fallen Apsara. She is an Apsara who has been cursed to live as a fisher woman. So he realized that at this particular conjunction, If he and she have a child, that child has the potential to be a great rishi. So, he, yeah, our old stories are fantastic. He just immediately propositions her, like, mm, let's do it. And she is a little taken aback, and at the same time quite flattered, because Parashara is a very great rishi, and great rishi wanting to do it with a fisherwoman. So she is like abashed, and she says, but like, we are right out in the open. And then so he says, here there is this sandbar island in the middle of the Yamuna, we'll go there and we'll do it. And then he uses his power and creates a fog, so nobody can see them doing it. So the deed is done, and he, I mean, the kind of cold-bloodedness in the text, he, after doing the deed, he immediately has a bath and he goes on his way. And the child is born immediately. But because he's a rishi and because she's a fallen apsara, again there is that divine thing. The child is born immediately and he instantly becomes full grown. He is Vedavyasa, and he tells his mother that whenever you think of me and have need of me, I will come. So when it came to Parashara Rishi, she didn't have any conditions. But when it came to Shantanu, suddenly there is this condition. So here is another great truth. In her mind, Shantanu was inferior. Shantanu was inferior to Parashara, which is probably true. But this is one of the great truths of the Red Pill, and that is, women make rules for betas, women break rules for alphas. In her mind, Parashara Rishi was the alpha. So, doing it with him on a sandbar island in the middle of an artificially created fog is okay. No issues there. But when a king comes asking for a hand, she has conditions. Just think of the sheer absurdity of it. A dude who has nothing because he's a wandering Parivrajaka Rishi, he gets everything for free, and the king has to beg. I'm sure a lot of people have been in situations like that. It is one of the commonest tropes. Women give away for free what the men they really desire, and they make conditions for the men they don't desire but think are useful, provisioning. They can secure my long-term future, but on these conditions. So Shantanu, again, he's noble. He doesn't want to do it. He won't agree. So Bhishma goes. Now this is the other thing I don't understand. If you look at the Mahabharata, there are a lot of stories where these young men are facilitating the sex life of their fathers. And I'm like, Yayati is probably the greatest example of that. I'm like, what's wrong? It should be, he should be thinking of getting his son married, not getting married himself at that age. And also, again, the Mantri Sabha is failing. What they should have done was find 4 or 5 of the most beautiful women, get them married off, because in those days kings could marry multiple times. Why kings? Even Hindu men could marry multiple times until the 1950s. Lock him up in a palace with 4 or 5 of them for about 2 months, let them have jolly time, and it would have burnt out. The whole fever, the romantic intoxication would have burnt out. That's the only real cure when somebody has one-itis like this. I know it sounds pretty cynical and horrible that a guru figure is saying things like this, but Kama is a Purushartha. And understanding Kama correctly is very important. And what India has done in recent times is completely mess up the whole notion of karma with insane perverse Gandhian ideas and notions of karma, and really it's a mess. We need to get back. So we need to get back to the classical notions of it. So there was a cure, but they didn't, and he wouldn't have listened also, I suppose, because he had this problem. He had this incurable oneitis all the time, and it was transferable apparently, because he first had oneitis for Ganga, but he realized, okay, she's Ganga, she's a goddess, wahan to it's not going to work out, so now he transfers it to somebody else. And then you all know the story. Bhishma goes and agrees, okay, Satyavati's children will get the throne, and that spiteful, malicious old man, the fisherman, he says, but your children will fight with her children, and they will lose, because you are a great hero and your children will be great heroes like you, and she's only, after all, a fisherwoman's daughter. So, which is all kinds of classist assumptions there, but okay, that was the nature of the time. So then he takes his great oath, which is why he's called Bhishma, the man who's taken the terrible oath of being in permanent celibacy. I have my own theories and my own hypotheses about why that is so. Some other time we'll get into that. And this is totally absurd against the laws of nature. You have a young man shutting off his entire sexual impulse. Even if we can argue that Vashishta's curse was inevitable and therefore that was the only thing that he could have done, we have a young man shutting off his sexual impulse so that his father in his middle age can have jolly time. It's absurd. It's completely perverse. It's a perversion of the natural law. That's not how it should be. And almost as if the nature, Prakriti, expressed its disapproval of this. Shantanu does have 2 children with Satyavati. One is Vichitravira, who is the father of Pandu and Dhritarashtra, and the other is Chitrangada. Chitrangada is the elder. He is supposed to be the heir to the throne. He is a complete jerk, offensive, bad-tempered, refuses to listen to Bhishma. And one day a Yaksha called Chitrangada turns, a Yaksha or Gandharva I think, turns up and says, my name is also Chitrangada. There cannot be 2 Chitrangadas. And so they have a battle on the banks of the Yamuna, which lasted for 3 years apparently, and he's slain. The Gandharva goes away after that. So it is almost as if nature takes a dim view of it. And then Vichitravira can't have children, even though Bhishma gets him wives and all that. And then Satyavati thinks of her son Vedavyasa, and then that is how Pandu, Dhritarashtra, you all know the story, Pandu, Dhritarashtra and Vidura are born. And she's still not happy with the results, because Pandu is born an albino, Dhritarashtra is born blind, and Vidura is a Dasi Putra, so he cannot be the king, even though he is the greatest. So you think of what Satyavati has achieved. She gets her grandchildren into power, but they are not the grandchildren of her husband. Yeah, they are the grandchildren of Parashara. She gets her own son and her own bloodline onto the throne of Hastinapura. Yes, legally and by the Shastric norms, they belong to Shantanu. But with all his, Shantanu has a son from a goddess, from the greatest, purest goddess we have in the Hindu pantheon. If that son had ruled Hastinapura, the whole history of Bharat would have been different. But he couldn't. Even after this whole, after his son goes and does this atrocity, in my view, an atrocity, he doesn't have the guts. I mean, again, I will say they are very noble. When that fisherman was making these conditions, they could have just planted a sword in his heart and said, like, yeah, okay, that argument's over. Now we will do what royalty has always done. They didn't do that. Both of them are very noble. They are again too noble for their own good, perhaps. So what is Shantanu left with? In the end, he's only left with this blessing for his son. He transfers his entire Shakti to him, that you will die only when you choose, Ichha Mrityu, which is regarded as one of the greatest things in the Hindu culture. A person who can die at will, a person who can die only when he chooses. But was it worth it? I mean, this whole catastrophe that then follows, the whole fight between the sons of Pandu and the sons of Dhritarashtra, with Vidura vaguely giving moral improvement lessons all the time and nobody listening to him. The entire mess that follows, the entire catastrophe of the Mahabharata, could have been avoided if Shantanu just had a little bit more self-discipline when it came to his karma. And that is perhaps the most important thing about Shantanu. That you can be so great and then just one flaw can have such calamitous, disastrous outcomes, not just for you but for the entire society you inhabit. And he was a king, so his responsibility is far greater. I've given you a lot to think about. There shall be more. This was our first Insights from Epics. This was episode 1 of Insights from Epics. Shantanu, who was simultaneously a very great and a very foolish man. Sarvam Shivamyam.